subject of profiles, a champion of players' rights.
He didn't score the winning goal, he didn't lift the cup, but Jimmy Hill changed the rules. And for that, they never truly forgave him. To some, he was a visionary. To others, a vandal in a blazer. He broke old systems, rewrote forgotten laws, and dragged football into the future. Not for the glory, but because he couldn't stand silence where justice should be. He gave players freedom, he gave fans spectacle, he gave clubs structure, and somehow became the man they blamed when things got too modern. He walked into boardrooms before it was normal, held the mic when others hid, redesigned match days, rewired TV screens, and never stopped challenging the world around him. Jimmy Hill didn't play to be popular, he played to be right. And the price for being right too early is to be hated quietly. They called him smug. They called him a showman. But what they never called him was what he was. The most underrated force in football's transformation. A man too bold for the system he tried to improve. This isn't about remembering a name, it's about recognizing how football forgot one of its builders. One man, one mind, one legacy that won't fit on a statue. Subscribe if you believe the game should never bury the men who built it. James William Thomas Hill was born on July 22, 1928 in Balham, South London. His father, William Hill, was a milkman, a World War I veteran who delivered bread and kept his head down. His mother, Alice Beatrice, raised him with discipline and silence. No football dreams, no legacy, just survival. But the boy saw something different in the game. Not just goals, structure, not just heroes, inequality. He grew up during war, went to Henry Thornton Grammar School, then served in the Royal Army Service Corps, rose to corporal, came back with questions, and never stopped asking them. He joined Brentford in 1949, thin, sharp, relentless. 83 league games, 10 goals, then Fulham in 1952, 276 appearances, 41 goals. But stats never told the truth about him. He didn't dazzle with flair, he didn't chase headlines, he asked questions. Why were players earning less than plumbers? Why did clubs hold all the power? Why were footballers silenced when they spoke? In a sport built on obedience, Hill thought like a rebel. And that made him dangerous. In 1958, he scored 5 goals in one match against Doncaster, a feat that should have defined his career. Instead, he was already plotting something bigger. Not on the pitch, but behind closed doors. He stayed late after training. He wrote letters to union reps. He read legal contracts while others drank pints. He didn't see himself as part of the game. He saw himself as someone who might change it. Teammates called him eccentric. Coaches called him difficult. But Jimmy Hill had already decided if no one else was going to speak up, he would. And once he started, he never stopped. He wasn't a striker in his prime. He wasn't even a captain. But in 1957, while still lacing up for Fulham, James William Thomas Hill stepped into a fight bigger than any football match. He became chairman of the Professional Footballers Association and walked straight into a war. Back then, players, no matter how gifted, were chained to the 20-a-week maximum wage. A flat ceiling, no negotiation, no freedom. It kept club profits high and footballers small. Jimmy Hill saw it for what it was. Legalized exploitation, and he called it out. In his words, no man who brings 50,000 people through the turnstiles should go home with less than a plumber. He organized union meetings across the country, spoke in smoky rooms where players whispered and directors scowled. He told them they'd be striking if things didn't change. Some laughed in his face, others warned, "You'll be blacklisted." But Hill had already made peace with the risk. He wasn't asking for money, he was demanding respect. And in January 1961, after years of pressure, the wage cap collapsed. Just like that, 100 years of control gone. Fulham teammate Johnny Haynes became the first 100-a-week footballer, and players across England stepped into a new era. Hill didn't celebrate, he just looked up and said, "Now they can breathe." But the owners didn't forget. One club chairman snarled, "That man's ruined football." He wasn't just a player anymore, he was a symbol of disruption, a name whispered in corridors with bitterness. He gave the players their voice, and in doing so made powerful enemies. He'd won, but the war had only just begun. and Jimmy Hill had just painted a target on his own back. When Jimmy Hill retired from playing, he could have walked into media, he could have vanished into memory. But he chose Coventry City, a second division side lost in grey. He arrived in 1961 with no coaching license, no suit, no promises. Just one belief: this club can be a blueprint. They laughed. The stadium was crumbling. The fans were dwindling, and the board only wanted stability. But Hill wanted a revolution. He tore up the old scripts, he changed the kit to sky blue. He built the first dedicated club shop. He introduced matchday music, player names on the back of programs, and weekly television broadcasts. Coventry became a brand before branding even existed. In his own words, "Football is not just a game, it's a production, and the fans deserve a spectacle." He modernized the training, renovated Highfield Road, and brought in players nobody else rated. And behind it all, Hill was planning something bigger: promotion. Not one tier. 2. By 1967, Coventry were First Division. The doubters vanished. The boardroom turned silent. Because this wasn't luck, it was design. But even then, some called him a gimmick man. They didn't see the genius. They saw the scarf, the stunts, the smile. They didn't understand. Because they weren't looking at the football. They were staring at the future and mistaking it for noise. He turned Coventry into a model, not for trophies, but for transformation. A second division backwater became a national reference, and still, the old guard whispered, "He's too much show, not enough substance." They never saw the blueprint, because they never looked beyond the chalkboard. But football was changing, and Jimmy Hill had already moved the goalposts. He left Coventry on a high, but Jimmy Hill wasn't done. In an era where ex-managers disappeared into smoke, Hill did the unthinkable. He stepped into the camera's light and redefined football broadcasting. No gimmicks now, no dugout, no clipboard, just a sharp mind, a cleaner suit, and a microphone that would change everything. BBC's Match of the Day wasn't ready. The game was still narrated like chess, slow, distant, detached. Then Jimmy arrived and made it human. He looked into the lens and spoke as if he knew you. Not with jargon, but with clarity, with opinion, with edge. That fullback's positioning is lazy. This is not good enough for the First Division. England needs to modernize its game. He didn't describe football, he diagnosed it. Live, ruthlessly. Some loved it, some hated it, but nobody ignored it. And behind the screen, he kept shaping the game. He pushed for 3 points for a win to kill off boring draws. He championed Sunday matches, live TV rights, fan accessibility. He predicted satellite football. He warned about the dangers of ownership greed. He foresaw the Premier League and saw the cracks in it before it was born. Jimmy wasn't just a voice, he was a compass. And yet, the FA never truly embraced him. Too sharp, too public, too uncontrollable. They liked their rebels silent. Hill refused. So he stayed in the studio week after week, decoding the sport that was outgrowing its soul. "If football loses touch with the working man," he once said, "it will lose itself." They heard him, they quoted him, but they rarely listened. Jimmy Hill was too ahead. Again. Jimmy Hill never ducked a fight, but some fights leave scars you can't see. And some enemies wear suits, not boots. His boldness didn't just make him famous, it made him divisive. The wage cap? Club owners never forgave him. Broadcast power? He ruffled BBC executives, FA officials, and rival pundits. When he pushed for all-seater stadiums, some fans said he was sanitizing the soul of the game. When he spoke up for unpopular players, he was called out of touch. But his biggest controversies came with a camera on. In 2004, during a Match of the Day episode, Hill defended Ron Atkinson's use of racially insensitive language, calling it just part of the culture back then. The backlash was swift. Jimmy insisted he wasn't defending racism, but the damage was done. It haunted his reputation, especially as the football world began to reckon with its own demons. The modern game was no longer his. He had built the bridge, but others crossed it with bigger brands, flashier suits, and none of the price he'd paid. The worst betrayal? Silence. When the FA celebrated landmark reforms, they left his name off the plaques. When broadcasters cashed in on the Premier League, few remembered who first demanded more than 2 cameras. And while every modern player reaped the freedom he won, very few ever said his name. "I sometimes wonder," Jimmy once told a friend, "if I made the game better for others, but worse for myself." Not self-pity, just truth. Jimmy Hill fought for fairness, but fairness rarely fought back for him. Jimmy Hill, the man who spoke for millions, lost his voice. In 2008, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. The broadcaster, the thinker, the fighter, slipping into a silence that no stadium roar could pierce. His wife Bryony bravely stepped forward, confirming the illness in 2013, saying what Jimmy never could, that he was fading. "It's cruel," she admitted. "He remembers football from decades ago, but not the game that aired yesterday." The tributes trickled in. Old teammates, young fans, ex-managers, they remembered, but something was off. The national tributes, the awards for the man who changed everything. It wasn't until December 19th, 2015, at age 87, that Jimmy Hill passed away. And only then did England truly pause. Arsenal wore black armbands, Coventry fans lit up the night with blue candles, pundits wept live on air. But the truth? The injustice had already happened. He died without knowing the full gratitude of the sport he rebuilt from the roots. Even his funeral, a mix of reverence and regret, saw broadcasters praise him as the godfather of modern football. But the last years? He spent them in quiet rooms. No headlines, no spotlight, no voice. Jimmy Hill wasn't just ignored at his peak, he was forgotten at the end. That silence? We don't accept it. They never honored him in time. They copied his ideas, then erased his name. They used his vision, then called it someone else's. But in every part of the modern game, Jimmy Hill still speaks. He's in the players' contracts, he's in the wide-angle camera, he's in the tactical board, the halftime breakdown, the replay frame that stops the world mid-pass, and when he could no longer fight, they softened the edges of his legacy, turned him into nostalgia instead of recognizing the fire he carried. He was awarded the OBE for services to football in 1995. In 2011, and a statue unveiled, arms outstretched, a smile on his face. But the truth? That statue is not a celebration. It's a reminder of how long they waited to thank him, of how many tried to silence him, of how far he had to go alone. They couldn't erase his work, so they delayed his reward. And even now, his legacy whispers louder than their applause. He left behind a family that adored him. His third wife, Bryony, his children, Duncan, Allison, Graham, Joanna, Jamie, each of them carrying the name of a man who shaped more than a sport. He shaped a culture. His memories now live in old videotapes, in grainy goals, in moments when fairness triumphed, because someone long ago fought for it. Jimmy Hill lives on in that kind of memory. The beautiful kind. The era when change had a face, and courage wore a tie. "We'll miss him every match day," said those who finally understood what they had too late. He isn't just part of football history, he is football history. Subscribe if you believe men like Jimmy Hill must be remembered, not just mentioned.